Next, we'll have Dr. Gray Hayes speak. Since 1986, Dr. Gray has focused on agroecology and natural resource systems ecology and conservation along California's central coast. Gray received his PhD in environmental studies at UC Santa Cruz in 2003 and is published in scientific and popular forums on a variety of different topics, mainly on grassland ecology and restoration of rare species conservation. In addition to spare time work managing organic orchards and advising many groups about ecosystem management and conservation, Dr. Hayes is currently education and research coordinator for Swanton Pacific Ranch. Swanton Pacific Ranch is a field station on a working ranch focused on developing hands-on skills and education to students from California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo.
I don't have a lot of slides. What I have is the beginning of this discussion, some precautionary principles about moving forward with afforestation. So I think we had some great opening words, Patrick, about the beauty of oaks and the importance of oaks. And I'm here to also caution you, don't always think about planting oaks everywhere. So the word afforestation is new for many people. And if you look it up, it's even new across the internet. Afforestation means planting trees or forests where they weren't previously. Some people think this is a good idea for climate change, for capturing more carbon, but it's increasingly understood that afforestation, as the bottom of this slide that you're hopefully seeing says, is that it can, if you put trees and forests in the wrong place, it can have really devastating impacts on biological diversity. So planting trees in the wrong place can badly affect birds and all sorts of other things. We understand the attraction of planting trees. They're big projects all over the world, including with like countries' military planting trees for carbon sequestration. If you work with the community, if you're a community organization or a land trust or a school or something, it's so exciting, right, to get children into the field and feeling like they're helping maybe with restoration or even with global climate change. So these programs, I'm sure everyone on the call has seen some request for community members to help plant trees on Arbor Day and other days. The problem is that much of California has never been forested, not in any recent time anyway. And they're incredibly large, biologically diverse grassland ecosystems with no trees in them whatsoever. In fact, they're incredible wildflower fields with amazing biological diversity, not just in the plants, but also in the animals. People flock throughout the world to come to California to enjoy these landscapes, which are incredibly biologically diverse. They aren't just these interior dry grasslands that erupt periodically into wildflowers, but they're also massive coastal wetland systems with no trees naturally occurring, such as around the San Francisco Bay, Morro Bay, and the Elkhorn Slough. And there are also extensive coastal dune habitats that are treeless and have a number of species that don't tolerate trees growing in them. I'm sure that we all recognize these landscapes as iconic in California, and maybe many of us can even think about the species that occupy those treeless habitats. At the same time, all around us, within those habitats, there are currently tree planting projects, such as the one pictured to the left in the middle of the Pajaro Valley, with children planting trees in vernal pool ecosystems. And the vernal pools are these wintertime wet habitats that in the spring as they dry erupt in wildflowers, many of them very rare. And also in these treeless habitats where this project's taking place, There are California burrowing owls that also rely on treeless habitats for their survival. Now, we're seeing restoration in some cases is good, like at Elkhorn Slough, where they're restoring tidal flow to large pasture lands and restoring those treeless landscapes to saline environments. And around the Elkhorn Slough, however, if you see this picture, you'll notice that there are trees, many of which have been planted. And so this restoration will not be complete until some of those trees potentially are removed. In other places of the Elkhorn Slough, where there were these saline treeless systems, people have been planting willows. And I want to talk a little bit about the problems with these willow tree plantings in these wetland systems as well. In any of these cases, when you plant trees in a treeless location, not only the plants could have negative impacts, but the surrounding wildlife can too. I think we are all familiar with hawks and owls perching on trees. And this is one of the things my bird conservation friends talk about, is the perches that trees bring in. And so great horned owls and other raptors perch in these trees. And in the case of around the Elkhorn Slough, where there are trees that aren't native there, these raptors are preying on the endangered snowy plover that makes habitat in the saline environments on the edge of the wetlands. And so there's restoration one thinks of for snowy plover on one hand, where you make the salt flats where the species loves to nest. And on the other hand, there's tree planting and actually putting up hawk perches for, the thought it would be good for biological diversity, and yet, it's negative impact on snowy plovers. That's just an introduction. I guess I'm going forward with the thought that everybody cares about species conservation, and I want to tell this short story about why we do care about where trees grow and the larger species conservation importance. Say you're getting on this airplane. I think many of us have now maybe started to avoid such things. And you're going up the staircase and you look out over the wing and see airplanes are put together with thousands of rivets. And let's use this as an analogy for planet Earth. You're getting onto planet Earth, and planet Earth is held together by all these rivets. These rivets are species in this case, right? And as you're getting on planet Earth and looking at all those rivets, you're appreciating the species that it takes to hold together everything, including what we eat and what we wear. And you notice when you're getting onto this plane, somebody unscrewing or hammering out the rivets on the side of the plane. And you say, what are you doing there? And the person replies, well, not all these rivets are important. Some of these rivets we might use on another plane that's missing some rivets, or maybe we just need to recycle them. Not all the, you can't say that every single rivet is important. So I would challenge everybody on today's meeting to think again about that. Would you feel comfortable going on a plane where rivets are being taken out? Or would you, like me, assume that all the rivets are important and do what you can to conserve them? This has to do with tree planting. In our grasslands, there are thousands of species of grassland-dependent organisms, including a wealth of wildflowers in our grasslands that cannot grow under the shade of trees. And there's a wealth of grassland-dependent wildlife as well that could perhaps move in and out of treed areas, but mainly survive in open grasslands. And so when thinking about planting trees, we really need to understand what the species diversity in that area is before deciding that trees should go there. For native plants, this entails doing botanical surveys according to published guidelines. And these guidelines suggest you should really look in all seasons, and perhaps in many years to determine if there are species that would be negatively affected by tree planting. But unfortunately, or fortunately, in some cases, not all species appeared every year, and there's seeds waiting in the soil seed bank to come up. That's why maybe familiarizing yourself with the species in many years is a good idea in grasslands. So plant surveys are great. Wildlife surveys are not always easy, but you probably have a lot of friends in your community that could do those things as well. Another way to determine whether or not it's appropriate to plant trees in an area is to think about the historical ecology of the area and whether that area ever supported trees. Like the project that Bruce has been involved with at Fort Ord, we're merely changing the age distribution of trees. You know, trees were there, they're there now, and they're just not reproducing. That's not controversial to replace age classes. However, you know, if you're actually changing a savanna into a forest, you might be eliminating species that need more sunlight than, say, scattered trees would entail. This is a picture of the Monterey Bay in the early 1800s, a mural that's in a building in Moss Landing, or Castroville, I guess. This is a treeless landscape, except for the oak that you see in the foreground on a little hill just north of the Elkhorn Slough. This giant valley up until the foothills was treeless. So you can look at portraits like this, old paintings, old pictures, and start to ask yourself whether or not you should be restoring woodland or grassland. Another thing to do is to look at historical aerial photographs, and the UC Santa Cruz Library has an amazing collection of historical photographs from the Central Coast that you can browse. I was going to show you a series of pictures of some grasslands at Swanton Pacific Ranch. Keep your eye on the end of the arrow and then look in the context. There appears to be quite a bit of grassland in this picture, in this recent picture. But if you go back to 1928, you'll see that many of those grasslands were agricultural. And so when you're thinking about whether or not you should restore grasslands, or maybe you could put trees in it, I'll have you understand that previously tilled areas that have been really worked for agriculture, like you can see in this picture, really have a very low chance of supporting any native plant community in the soil seed bank. Usually that kind of tilling really destroys the structure of the soil, and then those soils can't support grassland biodiversity in the plant realm. This is a picture from the 40s. You could see some of that early agriculture has been given up, and but not all of it. And then if you move forward in time to the 70s, you'll see all of the agriculture appears to be gone, and it all appears to be grassland. So it depends on your goals, whether you just want grassland structure, which is, say, all that some wildlife species need, or whether you're intending to restore and maintain grassland biological diversity. So at Swanton Pacific Ranch, we've really prioritized conserving the plant species of that untilled area, because they're species that occur there and nowhere else on the ranch because it hasn't been tilled, an important thing. We also prioritize keeping those grasslands open because we have grassland species like grasshopper, sparrows, that require grassland structure, even if they were previously agricultural. Another way of determining if there are grassland species that you want to conserve, if you're really concerned and you don't know whether they're in the soil seed bank, is to work with a nursery to grow up the soil and see if odd wildflowers pop out of the soil. Now, this is getting pretty involved, isn't it? Another very involved situation is to look at opal phytoliths in the soil. These are crystalline structures grasses exude as they grow. And we've discovered that large parts of the Berkeley Hills that appear grasslands now don't have these grass-specific opal phytoliths that last thousands and thousands of years in the soil. So without the abundance of those crystalline structures, we know they weren't really dominated by grasslands prehistorically. So there could be very large areas that could be restored to oak woodlands with little impact to the soil seabank, and in fact, restoring places to the way they should be. The last thing I'm going to say, because there might have some questions for me, is that coastal grasslands, not only should we probably not plant trees in many of them because they do support all of these grassland, open grassland dependent species, but also if we don't maintain disturbance regimes, such as the appropriate grazing regimes or fire, we're going to lose the grasslands anyway to shrubs and trees. The Highway 1 is cutting across this picture, and the coastal side of Highway 1, as is the case in many parts of California, is owned by California State Parks without the ability to manage for shrub and tree encroachment. And all of those areas will become shrub and tree lands in the next 20 years, if they haven't already. And the inland side, there's a grazing regime that has prevented that and is open grassland with much more grassland biological diversity. So we have to think about how to manage natural afforestation as well as people planting trees in the wrong area. Sorry to start out with a kind of bummer part, but I just wanted to make sure people understood that you have to put some thought into where to plant trees. So that's my talk.